and I've learned a couple of things about teaching adults. I've learned that a lot of adults get very bored when you teach, okay? And a lot of adults think that whoever's teaching them doesn't know as much as they do, okay? I've learned that very quickly. And it's often true, because when I teach, a lot of my students know a whole lot more than me. And I know that a lot of students get really upset if I go over time at all. So I'm going to make you some promises. I'm going to try not to bore you. I'm going to try not to bore you. I have pictures tonight that I'll show you, not just words. I'll invite you to talk, because the more you talk, the less I talk. And the more I talk, the more bored you'll get. So I invite you, when I ask you to say something, say something. Now, you may, if you really listen, you may just learn something tonight, okay? I've learned in my own thinking and my own going to class that if I'm really open to learning, I can learn something from anybody. And you can even learn something from me tonight. Let me give you an example. I share a really well-known Bible story with my graduate students. The story of Moses. You know the story of Moses, right? God called him up to the top of the mountain of God, and said, Moses, come on up here. And Moses went and spent 40 days and 40 nights up on the mountain, and God gave him the 10 Commandments, wrote them in tablets of stone, and he took them down the mountain, and they came down. When he came down, he saw they were having a big party around the golden calf. He got upset, and he threw them down, and that's what happened, right? Didn't happen like that at all. Not even close. Now, when I tell you that, I know what you're thinking. Oh, he's going to say something like, well, maybe Moses never existed, or maybe there's no evidence. It didn't happen like that in the Bible. Let me tell you what really happened. And I challenge you after class to go look it up and see if I'm being honest with you. God had been talking to Moses for a long time. And God said to Moses, you know, it's time that I reveal myself to the children of Israel. And so here's what I want you to do, Moses. I want you to go back down the mountain, and I want you to tell everybody to get ready. Give them 3 days to get ready to see me. And I'm going to come and reveal myself and talk to the children of Israel. And I want you to put a rope in front of the mountain so nobody goes across it, because if they do, they'll surely die. And so what happened when that 3rd day came, clouds started developing on top of the mountain. They started coming down. Trumpets started blaring, lightning and thunder. And all of a sudden, out of the cloud, God spoke the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God, therefore. And it wasn't just to Moses. It wasn't on a tablet of stone. That came much later. Everybody heard it. He spoke it, and everybody heard it with their ears. And after that, they said, Moses, we don't want to talk to God anymore. That's too scary. You go up there and you deal with it. Now, some of you knew that if you really studied. A lot of you didn't, because what you took was the movie, the 10 Commandments. That's what happened in the 10 Commandments. And you'd be surprised how many people relate that first story as the way it was. So tonight what I want to do is give you a little bit different slant on faith. A lot of you have studied faith. You know a lot about faith. I want to get you thinking about it and maybe coming up with some ideas how we can increase our faith as believers. Okay. You all have a match? I want to start with the match, if we would. Look at your match for just a second. Everybody have a match? You need 2 matches, okay. We're not going to start a fire in here tonight. Don't worry about it. I just want you to have something to look at. Now look at that match. If you were, you see this little thing right here? If you were to do that, what do you think would happen? How do you know that?
Because I've done it before.
You've done it before. And you're sure that match is going to light?
No, because you might have soaked it with something.
I might have done something, right? Now what I have like a bowl. So, and I don't want anybody to touch the match to anything, but let's just see if you're right, okay? It worked. Blow it out first. Don't worry. Now look at your match. Will it light? Why do you know it'll light? How do you know it'll light? She just did it, so that's more evidence that I didn't fool with it, right? Let's try it. Go ahead. Wow, it worked. Okay, thank you. Your match, will it work? Now, you don't have any evidence that it's going to work except that you've seen it work twice and you know a little bit about matches. When I handed you a match tonight, you looked at it and you said, whoa, that's a match. And in fact, I handed it out and somebody said, oh, where's my match? Because you've used it so many times. So there's not a lot of faith involved in that, is it? Now, if I gave you something like, well, I don't have it here, but if your match looks something like that, it might take a lot of faith to start saying it's going to light, right? Because it doesn't have the little red thing on top because of your experience. So that's what we're going to talk about, is how we know things in this world, in where we live and where we breathe. How do we know things to be true? Now, if you think about that, there are a lot of things that we think are true, but they may not be, because we're stuck in this world, in these four dimensions: this way, this way, this way, and time. So somebody, not just a Bible thing, but tell me something you know to be true in life.
I love my grandbabies.
You what?
I love my grandbabies.
You're sure about that? You're sure about that? It couldn't be just some sort of dream. See, if you go into a philosophy class, by the time you get out, you could be doubting who you are and how you feel, okay? How many of you believe the earth's round? It's not a trick question.
In general, yeah.
Relatively round. Why do you think that? Why do you think the earth is round? Why isn't it flat?
Because when there's an eclipse, you can see the shape of the earth on the moon.
And that means the earth is not flat.
Well, you can see that it's round. You can see its shadow on the moon.
Okay. Have you ever traveled all the way around? Has anybody seen pictures of the earth from space? And you say it's round because of that? Is that real? I went to see Star Wars this weekend, and a lot of that looked real to me. See? Okay. You know, there are a lot of people that believe the earth is flat.
I know, and I've read somebody that are very persuasive.
And they can be very persuasive, and they have good theory to support it, and yet many of us believe the earth is round, and we're sure of it. Now, the problem is that there's no sure thing in this world. If you think about it, we call strong beliefs facts, when really they're beliefs. They're things we use and we call it a fact. We don't even understand it, but we call it a fact. How many of you use a microwave? Most of you. Who understands how a microwave works? We have one. Two. If your microwave broke, what would you do? Go buy another one. I have not a clue. And yet, all of us that don't understand that thing, we know it cooks food really quick, right? And yet we'll put food in it and we'll stand right at the window and look in it and not worry about it baking our face.
I don't. I stand away because I want to show my face.
And if you look at the window, it has that little metal or whatever it is thing in there that supposedly keeps us safe. Now, we don't understand it, but we have faith in it. So many, many things in this world we are sure about, but we don't understand it. And it's not a fact. It's just our belief. Most of you came here in a car tonight, right? And most of you don't know how the car works. I used to understand how cars work before they put computers in it. And now, there's no tuning a car. There's no really making a motor run well. It's just, does it or doesn't it? It's a computer. So that's the problem we have with life, is what is a belief and what's a fact? When does a belief come strong enough that we base our lives on it? And that's where we talk about faith. Okay? Now, I'm going to let you talk for a minute. God's Word. What do you know about faith? What have you heard about faith in the Bible? And I'm not going to make you quote any scripture. Just tell me what you remember or think or heard about faith. Yes, ma'am.
Jesus said if you have enough faith, you can move a mountain.
If you have faith, you can move a mountain. Okay? What else? This is on film, so they can't hear it when you talk. What else have you heard about faith? Yes, sir. Say it into the microphone, please.
Faith is not a feeling.
It's not a feeling. It's something much more than a feeling. It's an acceptance of something. What else have you heard about faith? I don't want to intimidate you with this, but go ahead.
I was just putting my hand up. It's just, you know that God is there, so you know that He is standing right next to you. Even though you can't see Him, you know He's there.
Okay?
So it's you believe that He's there.
Faith, belief becomes knowledge. Remember, the Bible says faith is believing in something you can't see. And that's very difficult, to believe in something you can't see. But nevertheless, we do that. What else do you remember about faith in the Bible?
The Lord says He's going to give you, the Lord says that you're not guessing at this thing.
Say again.
The Lord says He's not going to make you guess at this thing, basically. That He's going to give you evidence so that you'll know.
Okay, the Lord will help us by giving us evidence. You see, remember this. Oh, good. That's a nice little holder. Look up here. The more evidence you have, the less faith you need. See, a lot of you don't pray before you get into the car. God, get me home safely without me dying. You just hop in the car, turn it on, and go. Because there's a lot of evidence. Well, so, okay. Yeah, the older your car, the more you pray. I understand that. But if you don't have all that evidence, you have to have a lot of faith. You see, the less evidence you have, the more faith you need. Okay, so what I'd like to do tonight is to explore a few kinds of faith, tell you a few stories, show you some things, and then we'll have a discussion about applying what we've learned tonight, okay? So, I want to talk first about challenge faith. Challenge faith is where God says to us, do something to prove your mettle, to prove who you are, to see if you're worthy. Now, a lot of times in our thinking, God makes us worthy, but sometimes God puts obstacles to us to see what we're made of. And I want to call your attention to Joshua. Joshua was a guy that had to deal with some real challenges. Show you a picture here. All of you remember Joshua, if you studied that book about fighting the Battle of Jericho, what you may not have studied is what happened before that. They wandered around for 40 years in the wilderness because they had sinned. And God finally said, okay, it's time to go to the promised land. All of those people have died off, and I'm going to take you to the promised land after 40 years of wandering. What a wonderful thing. This is their route. If you can see, they crossed over the Jordan, went up to Gilgal to set up camp, and then went to Jericho. And that's a very short distance in all of those. Now the problem is, that's the river Jericho. That's the river Jordan. And that's what they crossed over. Looks pretty easy, doesn't it? I mean, you could walk over that. It's not that big. Look at this. You could just walk over and maybe put some logs down and just ford over it. No problem. If God would have sent them across at a certain time of year. But God chose the worst time for them to go over. He chose the time when that looks like that. The Jordan, during the rainy season, it floods its banks. And it's just huge and wide, a mile wide. And not only that, it's very treacherous and a lot of rapids. And that's the time that God said, okay, Joshua, time to go to the promised land. And so if you can imagine what they felt like looking at this river like that, that's that wide, trees floating down it, houses, huts, everything. And he said, okay, now everybody's going to cross. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to take the Ark of the Covenant, and I want the priest to carry the Ark of the Covenant, and I want them to walk through the water. And when you walk through the water, I'm going to do a miracle. I'll get you across. And so, you know, the scripture is not real clear. It says, when they entered the water, God parted the waters. And you probably know that. You know that part. He had done that when they were escaping Pharaoh. I kind of think that they didn't just touch the water and it parted. I think God waited till they got like up to here and then did something. A lot of times he does that to us. Like it would be nice if we had our challenge and then everything was fine. If I just said, okay, I'm going to do it. And then it all works out. But sometimes we have to get right up to here to show our faith. And that's what happened to Joshua. And so a wonderful thing happened. The waters parted. They built a monument there. They brought stones, built a monument. They all got across, and then the waters came back. Wonderful miracle. And then they said, okay, we're now in the promised land. Challenge number 2. They got to Gilgal to set up camp, and God said, you forgot something. You weren't circumcising men during your wandering. So you have all of these men that are uncircumcised. So before we do anything, let's circumcise everybody. Now, if you know anything about circumcision, the healing process is not fun. Even if we do it today in a hospital, if a man gets circumcised, he is immobilized for a week and a half. Can you say amen to that? That's why we do it as little babies, because if you're a man and you get it done, you're going to you can't move because it hurts so much. So you had all of these warriors, all of the people in Israel, all the men were incapacitated for a week and a half. And all they could do was lay around. And they were right in the shadow of Jericho. Now you can imagine what Jericho was thinking, right? I mean, you have all these people, they're just laying around. We could go and kill them all. Why do we have to worry about them? They're all laying there. They can't move. Let's just go kill them all. But they didn't. And so they survived that challenge. And then after they did that, and after they got all ready for battle, God said, let's do something else. We're not going to batter down the door. We're not going to set up battlements so we can take over the city. I just want you to walk around the city, march around it, have some singers out front, and march around the walls one time for 6 days. Now, wait a minute. You have these battlements and all of these archers ready to kill us, and you want us to walk around the wall every day, not doing anything, not shooting anybody, just walking, singing, and they're aiming arrows at us? But that's what he wanted to do. And he said, the last day, I want you to walk around the wall 7 times. Let's give them a real chance to get you. No military commander on earth would do that something that weird. And the 7th day, God did something amazing, just like when they crossed the Jordan. Now, you would think it would be so much nicer if we just went across the Jordan, the walls tumbled down because God was on our side, and we're just going to be okay. But it didn't happen that way. So, let's talk about another kind of faith, fleece faith. Do you know the story of Gideon? Somebody tell us the story of Gideon real quick.
Gideon put out a fleece, and then he asked God to make the ground wet and the fleece dry. The first time, second time he said make the fleece wet and the ground dry.
Yeah.
But he had, who he was, or
Yeah.
giving the right answer.
Yeah, and when you read that story, you say, oh my Lord, wow, he's really testing God there. Has anybody ever put out a fleece in your life? I'm just curious. It's okay to put out fleeces. Has anybody done that in your life where you say, God, if you do this, I know that you're going to work? Yes.
I did it to marry Lee. When I was dating Lee, I felt like the Lord told me I was supposed to marry him. We've been dating about 4 months. And I felt like that he was living in Orlando. I was living in years ago and finished training for a job. And I've been praying about my husband who I was supposed to marry. He was training for a job, and when he finished his training in December, they were supposed to send him to wherever he was supposed to go. And what was on the table was Baltimore, Maryland, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I was living in Tampa. And so I felt like the Lord told me I was going to marry him, and I said, "But Lord, he's moving, really far away. I don't think it's going to work." And so I said, "Lord, if he's supposed to be my husband, you're going to have to send him to Tampa. Supernaturally, you're going to have to do something to get him to Tampa." And a week later, he called me and said, this was October, he was supposed to finish in December, and he said, "You'll never believe it, but my boss just called me in the office, and they told me I'm finishing my training today, and they have an immediate need, an opening in Tampa, suddenly, and they're sending me there next week." And the following week, he was in Tampa. So that was my fleece.
Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? God sometimes challenges us and makes us really do something hard. And other times, it's just so cool when he does that, isn't it? You throw out a fleece and say, God, show me something. Do something miraculous. Show me the way to go. Anybody else have a fleece that they did in their life? Yes, sir.
I know somebody with a fleece.
Okay.
My son-in-law
Sometimes God doesn't do that.
I think he put up barriers to say, God, you got to break through this barrier that I created to get to me.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll sort of explore why that happens. Anybody else have another fleece? Yes, ma'am.
I do. When I was, right after my son was born, my company was moving from Pasadena, California to Anaheim. And I says, okay, God, if I'm supposed to move, you're going to find me an apartment that's cheaper than what I'm paying for and a Christian babysitter. And so I drove over to Anaheim, and lo and behold, I found an apartment that was $25 less a month, and it had a swimming pool, which the other one didn't. And I found a Christian babysitter that was about 4 miles away. They would take care of Keith while he was there.
And so it was all done. It was just laid out for you. Isn't that nice? And you knew to come here. You knew you didn't have to go to Baltimore. I mean, it could have been that way. He could have been in Baltimore, then you would have been in a pickle, right? And her parents would have been in a pickle too, but. Let's go on. Abiding faith. This is a kind of faith that's always there. It's a faith that no matter what happens, you know somebody is in charge of your life. God's in charge. And it's not that sort of faith that's always dramatic in your life, but it's just a knowledge that you're doing the right thing and God has you in his hand and he's going to have a plan for you. And he's going to make it work. Now, the good thing about abiding faith, and I'll just tell you this, is that the older you get, now there's not a lot of benefits of getting old, okay? There's really not. I've got a milestone coming up in May, my 70th. Can you imagine being 70 years old? I can't imagine it. And Kelly wants to have a big, she says, what do you want to do for your 70th birthday? I want to forget it. But you know, one of the value, yes, go ahead.
It's fun being 70.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. But you know, the cool thing about being 70 is that you can look back at your life and see God's work in your life and see how it all came out. You see, when you're young, looking ahead is an exercise of faith. It's that abiding faith to know that it may not look real promising now. We're full of financial problems, and I have all sorts of child problems and kid problems and work problems, but it's all going to be working out. And that's that abiding faith. I give you a verse up here. I give you a couple of verses. Matthew 20:16. So the last will be first, and the first will be last. Now, what does that have to do with abiding faith? It's a knowledge that it's all going to be okay. We don't have to compete to be the best. We don't have to be the first. We don't have to compete all of our lives. We can just rest on the fact that if it doesn't work out that way, it's going to be okay in the end. Because the last will be the first. And if I'm in the middle, I'm going to be okay. And even if I'm in the last, wow, that's going to be a cool thing. That's abiding faith. Psalms 102, 119, and this will all be put on the website so you can get the scriptures. I have not departed from your laws, for you yourself has taught me. When God teaches us what we should be and who we should be, and instills that in us, what?
Is that 119, 102?
It's probably 119, 102. Did I get it mixed up? It's what? Dr. Kirk, do you have a typo in your PowerPoint? I hear that all the time. I hear that all the time. Okay. You'd be surprised how many times I hear that in class. Romans 6:8. I think that's the right one. Now, if we died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with him. That is a statement of faith. That is saying that we're going to be okay. We're going to live with Christ no matter what. Philippians 4:4-9. You know, before I came back to academia, I was in private practice in mental health. And I dealt with a lot of people that were depressed and anxious, and their life was falling apart, and they just, nothing was working in their life. And they were coming and paying me as their therapist to help them cope with life better. And if they just knew the secret, they wouldn't need me. And that's the secret, by the way. If you're ever depressed, if you're ever lonely, if you think God's too far away from you and your life's not working, just do that. Whatever's good and whatever's lovely, whatever's honorable, if anything is of good report, dwell on that. Think about that. And then the peace that passes all understanding will guard your heart. Isn't that cool? And so many times, if we have the faith that that will work, and we start thinking about the good and the lovely and the beautiful and the good things, then all of those cares will fall away. Okay? Crisis faith. You've all had crises, right? Okay. It could be health, it could be family, it could be disaster, it could be all sorts of crises that confront us. And that's one of the benefits of who we are, is because God can help us in those crises. He can really make a difference. We can run to God for help. And I give you a few verses. I hope these are the right ones. Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in trouble. That's enough to get you through right there. God is available. He's ever-present in trouble. Psalm 50:15, call on me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you will honor me. So many people get delivered, but they don't honor God. They say, oh, well, the doctors did a great job, or you know, whatever. But they don't give God the glory. Okay? Mark 1:42, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Now, I don't think any of you have had leprosy. But I tell you what, if you've ever had a chronic condition, that deliverance is so wonderful if you've had it. I have hearing problems, always have, for a long time. And I would be so happy if I were delivered from that. But it hasn't happened yet. But if it did, isn't that a wonderful thing? And think about those things that you need deliverance from. God is ready. Lamentations. Let me tell you about this verse. It's one of the verses I really love. And I used to use this in my practice also. This guy was looking out over his beautiful city that had been trashed and defeated and burned. It was just ruins. There was nothing there. It was devastation. And he was sitting, rolling around in the dirt, crying and pleading. And it was just so awful. His life had just crumbled. And after all of thinking about how bad and how awful it was, he said this, I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. And the chapter before that, he listed all that bitterness and gall that he'd been feeling. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet, this I will call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassion never fails. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. That is a huge statement of faith. And he was sitting in the middle of devastation and could still say that. And he got up and started rebuilding the city. One more. Impossible faith. God does things that are really cool and really impossible to do. I mean, they're just absolutely impossible. Moving mountains, you've probably seen that. He replied, if you have faith as a small mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it will obey you. And we also talk about moving mountains. If you have enough faith, you can do amazing things. I've never seen anybody yet go to a mulberry tree and say, hey, uproot yourself, go down to the sea and plant yourself in the sea and start growing. And yet, something that amazing can happen. John 11:43, when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Raising the dead. Amazing. How does that happen? Somebody that's been dead and buried for 3 or 4 days is raised. Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me a share of the estate. So he divided the property between them. Again, an impossible situation. The son goes away, and God can restore the family. Impossible. I'm going to ask you to share some impossible times. I'm going to give you one that I witnessed myself that I still don't understand. I really don't understand it, but it's impossible. And I have faith that God did it. I had this woman that was coming to me for counseling, and she had been coming for about 6 months before this happened. And I think Ron met her. Remember when we were meeting out in the pavilion? She came to church that day. She came to my office, and I was doing, secular stuff. And she knew I was a Christian, knew that I did some Christian counseling. And she said, I just want you to know that I'm going to be healed. Now, this lady was a champion swimmer in college. She was a really good swimmer, very athletic. But she was not vaccinated against polio. So in her junior year, she got polio. And they were able to treat it, but her legs paid the price. They were completely atrophied. They were bones. She mainly went around in a motorized wheelchair. She would come to sessions with her wheelchair. And if she walked, she had no way to walk. She had to walk like this. If you've ever seen anybody that has like a brace on their leg, she had a brace here and a brace here, and she could walk like this with her hip. And if she, it was very hard on her to walk, but she would come to sessions with her wheelchair, leave it out, and then she'd walk in the office and have to take her brace off and sit down, and she wore shorts a lot of times, and, bony leg. She said, I'm going to be healed tonight. I said, okay. Tell me about it. She said, well, Benny Hinn is having a crusade in Miami, and somebody told me if I go to that crusade, I'll be healed. I said, okay. And because I had not strong faith at that time, I said, well, don't be disappointed if it doesn't happen. You can imagine what I said, right? I mean, God may do it, but God may not do it, and I don't want you to be discouraged if it doesn't happen. I didn't say that. I said, well, let me hear what happens. She comes in the next day, didn't have an appointment, and she didn't have her wheelchair, didn't have her motorized wheelchair, and she was walking just like this, and she said, well, I'm healed. I said, what? She said, I'm healed. I don't need a brace. I'm walking around. And she was walking around the office like this, really easy. And she said, here's my brace. I took it off. I don't need it. And I said, wow, that's amazing. She said, no. What's really amazing, I want to show you something. She had long pants on. She said, watch this. She put her leg up, and she pulled her pants up like this. And she said, look at that leg. And it was muscular. She said, look at that. And I had seen her legs before. They were bones. There was no muscle. It was just skin and an atrophied leg. And she had muscles bulging out in her calves. Completely new legs. Overnight. Oh, my Lord. Now, I'd been seeing her for 6 months, so I know it wasn't just a passing thing. And I kept up with her for about 2 years afterwards. We moved away shortly after that. But I always got calls from her. She said, my legs are still fine. She came to our church one day and brought her brace. And we had the people in the church pray for her and lay hands on her. And that was pretty cool. I don't know how it happened. But amazing. What amazing things have you seen?
A Lazarus type moment with my father.
Share it, if you would.
We watched him slowly
Could you do
die.
this so the internet can...
And my father had So my father had a massive heart attack, and was basically told that he would be dead by 5:30 because of the extensive heart attack he had. And we watched him, basically, we called the family, and we watched him slowly die off and on throughout the day for about 6 hours. And then we were told that we should just all be prepared, and we were all around him. My dad's one of 11, so all of the fourth floor was consumed by our family. And we were all around him singing hymns, and my uncles were praying over him, and we were all singing his favorite hymns. And he was breathing like every 30 seconds the last hour, if he was breathing at all. And they called his death, and we all said our goodbyes, and we were all standing around. And they rushed us all out of the room, and what was it, 6 or 7 minutes or something like that? The last time. Anyway, it was 6 to 7 minutes. The nurses came in, and they were like, we're going to, go ahead and get his body prepared. And my brother refused to leave the room. My brother leans down, and he says, why is his eyes still moving like that? And the nurses go, well, your brain still sends signals, so this is why we ask the family to leave at this point, because you'll see involuntary muscle movements and that type thing. And my brother goes, no, he's still in there. And the nurses were like, okay. And so he refused to leave, and he leaned down to my dad, and he goes, Pop, I know you're still in there because I saw your arms and your legs move. He goes, I know you're still in there. He goes, open your eyes right now and look at me. My dad's eyes flew up, and he says, what? And we all, there was a nurse standing by his bed who, her knees hit the floor, and I think if the doctor hadn't had the door casing to grab, he would have fallen as well. And within an hour or so, he was completely stable. There was no CPR. There was nothing. There were no machines hooked up to him at all. And we asked him about what had happened. And he said he had gone on a little trip. And we were like, really? Where'd you go? And he said that he saw my grandmother and all the children, and I think what he means is the children that she lost.
Yeah.
And that she was on the porch of the old farmhouse, and she was young, and all the kids were running around playing. And I was like, that's just amazing. And he goes, I know where I was. And I'm at this point still doubting it, but all of the brothers and sisters are all thanking God and praising God that he was back and that he was coherent after having been without oxygen for that long. And I believed it when he told me that he had never seen color like he saw while he was on his trip. And I knew at that moment where he had been because my dad had been colorblind his whole life. So,
Wow.
yeah. And we had him for another 2 years.
2 years? Someone else.
Well, from another point of view, the doctors pronounced him dead at 17:43 hours. I immediately texted my bosses, hey, I'm sorry to report my father-in-law is dead. Almost 3 hours later, a little over 3 hours, is when they said he was dead. It was like 3 hours later when he sat up. And the nurse fell to her knees, and the doctor came running down the hall looking at his watch. He couldn't believe it either. Nobody could believe it in there. And then the glory of God was spread, and people were singing and praising. But they did say he was dead for most of those 3 hours. He would come back to life for a little bit of time, and they'd go back, in and out. But it was amazing. The doctor said in 31 years he'd seen only one other miracle.
Yeah? Someone else, what amazing thing have you seen? Doesn't have to be that dramatic, but if it just amazed you, what have you seen? I'll bring you there.
Same thing with my dad in 2007. I was in Houston, Texas. During the time, one night, I had a call from India. One of the doctor, they called me and told, your dad is in the emergency. He had an heart attack. And that is the first time I've seen my dad in the hospital, because from small I've not seen him. Even he was having a headache. So I don't know what to do. So they told only 1 day's time it's given, because 4 days before, 1 week before, in my spirit, I felt something is going to happen to my dad. So myself and my sister told my dad that you have to go for a checkup for heart. And so he told, no, I'm a healthy person, nothing will happen to me. But he didn't listen to us. So what we did, we took an appointment from a heart specialist in India. It's a very #1 hospital. Friday he has to go for that checkup. But what happened, the enemy took him on Thursday night into the hospital for emergency for heart attack. So that time when I got that call, they told only 1 day's time, so you travel and come like that. We'll tell you what to do. So immediately on the night, it was early morning, 3 o'clock, I was sitting on my couch and I was telling Lord Jesus, Jesus, I know that you have promised me, that time my father was not saved, and you have promised me that as it is told in the Bible, my house and myself, we will serve you, Lord. But my father has not saved. He has to get saved, and then only you can take him into your kingdom. So devil doesn't have any authority to take his life. So 3 o'clock, I was just talking only for a minute to the Lord, and I told Lord, I'm feeling very tired the whole night. I was sitting like this, thinking about my dad, but I'm going to sleep now. So they told early morning at 7 o'clock, they will tell, because 7 o'clock is the time given for him, that everything has to take place. And I went and slept, and it was 8 o'clock. And I just called them what happened, and they told supernaturally my dad was okay. And they told we will keep him only for 2-3 days, and then he will return home. So I was very happy, and because during that time I told my mom and everyone, don't get worried, he will be alive, nothing will happen. So he came home, and within a month, he had the second heart attack. Within a month, again he was in the hospital, in the emergency, and this time the doctor told 100% he will die. Again they fixed the time, and they told, please call all your daughters, because I was here and one of my sister is in Australia. And they told, tell everyone to come to India, because they can at least see the funeral, and they arranged for funeral and everything. But I told no, nothing will happen to him. I know what God has promised me. He will keep that promise. And the same thing happened. Everyone, they came, and the same thing, he supernaturally was healed, and within 2 or 3 days, he came back home. So now, past 10 years, and before I'm leaving, I went to India and came back again to US. During that time in 2011, again he got a third attack. But the same thing I told devil, you don't have any rights to take my dad's life until
Well, you know, maybe you've had something like that, maybe you haven't. But what that becomes is a monument in your life. You look at it and you say, that's God working, without a doubt. That's that monument of faith. When my faith wavers, I think about those times where God has done something really amazing. And it's a monument. It keeps me thinking that it's going to be okay, that God's in control. Anybody else have one that they want to say? Yes. Please.
When I was expecting Troy, I developed a fibroid tumor, which 48 years ago, that there wasn't the research there is today. So it became degenerated, and I was rushed to the hospital, and the doctors told us that there had never been anyone kept their baby, and that I would have a hysterectomy. No one had not had a hysterectomy, and that I had a 30% chance of living. And so they had, I remember I was in tennis shoes. I mean, it was an emergency surgery, and I was in tennis shoes a few minutes before surgery, and I could hear the helicopter landing on the roof because they were bringing in additional blood, because it's very hard to operate on a pregnant uterus. So anyways, when it was all over, the doctor came in, and he put his head between his knees, and he said, we doctors think kind of like we're little gods. And he said, the strangest thing happened in that operating room. He said, it was like a knife. I mean, he said, it was like the Lord, he said, God had to be directing my hands, because he said, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't still have this baby. And since then, 2 surgeons have told me that if he would have slipped his knife 1/4 of an inch, Troy wouldn't be here. So to me, that stands as a monument. Wow. But I need to add, my dad, in those days, they had old-fashioned prayer meetings, and he called people together, and around the little church in our little town of 100 people, there were people gathered around the altar until they heard the surgery was over. We were working with the teens, and we didn't have the church was just cement. It didn't have a carpet where the teens were, and they were on their knees on the cement floor praying for me. And no one will ever convince me, but that God didn't do a miracle. And I spoke to the doctor probably 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, and he said, he said, I should have written your case up, because it was just absolutely, it should have been in the medical journals. He said, but I never got around to it. He said, he said, now we've done research, things are different. But he said, it was just an absolute, I can't explain it, but I can explain it. It was God. Because Troy was supposed to be here.
Next week, when we talk about building our faith, and that's what next week's about, we're going to be talking about establishing some monuments in your life. Even if you don't have these amazing big things that happen, there are monuments we can all build that will increase our faith, that we can look back on when we need more faith, when we need to believe. And so that's what we'll be talking about next week. One more thing. Yeah. Yes.
Like a monument?
No, you can't. You have to be quiet. No, that's okay. I just
Okay, so...
I say that to my students, and they get all freaked out, They say, oh, he's mean. So, go ahead.
At my job, my boss's wife, she first started getting sick, and he didn't know what it was at first. At first, they said it was a cold, and then it turned into a small fever, and then all of a sudden, one day, she woke up. Well, she couldn't move at all, and she started coughing to the point where she started coughing up blood. And so they rushed her to the hospital, and she had some sort of unknown virus. The doctors couldn't even pinpoint what it was at first. It first was in her head, then it spread into her throat, and then it infected her lungs so much she couldn't breathe. She couldn't eat, she could barely sleep, and my boss has only been with his wife for about 4 years. So they said if they didn't do something quickly, she was going to die. So each day he would start coming into work and starting to look more and more sad. He could barely work. He just sat up in his office and just didn't do anything because he was worried sick about his wife. So out of the blue, I just asked him, hey, are you okay? You seem kind of off today. And he just opened up to me to the point where he started crying. And he said, my wife is in the hospital, and if they don't do anything to her soon, she's going to die. They don't know what virus she has. So I asked him right there, can I pray for you? He's like, I could use all the prayer that I can get right now. So I prayed for him, and so I went home and just started praying every day for the past about 3 days. And slowly, she started getting a little bit more better and better. And so I told my mom about it, and her and I started praying. And about a week later, he came back into work, and I asked him, how's your wife doing? And he said, 4 days ago, they didn't know what happened, but all of a sudden she just woke up one day, she was totally fine. The virus just left her system completely, and they don't know what happened. And I told him, I'm glad she's doing all right. And he said, thank you for your prayers, because I don't know what I would have done if I lost my wife.
And that becomes a real foundation for you.
Yes.
Because when you start doubting, when you start thinking, oh, maybe this is all not real, you can think back to that and say, wow, that's meaningful.
Yes.
That's reality.
And he's not even a Christian at all.
Yeah. We need to do a little group discussion here. What I'd like you to do, I'd like you to get into 3 small groups. And we're not going to do anything like number off. I just want you to get with 3 groups, equal size. So go for it. Stand up and get where you can talk to each other. That's good. You're standing around. Let's keep it going. You're really doing a good job. I see 1 group. I see 2 groups. I see 3 groups. We have 3 back here. Work with me now. We have 5 here. We have 4, and we have 7. So somebody needs to volunteer to go back with them. Okay. Good. Now get where you can talk to each other, because I've got a few questions about faith I want you to talk about, and I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to do it. And then I want 1 person from the group to take notes, so when I ask you what you came up with, you can tell everybody, okay? And we'll have a little discussion. If you look up on the screen there, I have 4 things I want you to do. Develop 1 practical example of each kind of faith that I gave you. And I'll give you those kinds again, so you can do some practical examples, some examples that you've had in your life. Hopefully you can come up with one. If you don't worry about it. The next one, and this is very controversial when we talk about faith. There are people that teach name it and claim it. Have you heard that? All you have to do is name it, and God will give it to you, because He loves you. Just do it. Don't doubt. What is right about name it and claim it? Don't cast it off. What's right about it? And then talk about what is the error in name it and claim it, so we can understand that. And then 1 person reports what you came up with, okay? So you have about 15 minutes to talk about these, and I'll put the kinds of faith that we talked about. Challenge faith, abiding faith, crisis faith, and impossible faith. Yeah.
Lisa explained the tithing challenge when they began the church, and they wanted to do the right thing. And I won't tell you about the squabbles that she and Walker had. You did the right thing. But they saw that meeting God's challenge to tithe paid off the way God has promised.
Tithing for a lot of families is an incredible challenge because it doesn't make sense. When you do your budget, it doesn't make sense. And that's a huge challenge until you do it. And it's just like Joshua saying, okay, God, it doesn't make any sense to circumcise my army. There's no reasonable way that'll work. But it did. So a very good example. Someone else. What did you all come up with? Anything?
Yeah, Linda said she volunteered to talk.
No.
Who's the talker? There you go.
Okay, so for impossible faith, for me getting into Georgia Tech, where I'm applying, is basically going to be impossible, and it's gonna take a miracle of God to get me in, based on just my life experiences. And I have a really bad GPA right now, but God has been really faithful to me, and He's been building up over the past 2 years what looks like I got a job. I used to be working in a bunch of restaurants, and one of my customers came in. Okay, so basically, I was working a double, and I looked at the schedule for later on in the evening, and my section was really great. I was going to make tons of money. It was going to be a good night. And then early on in the day, the schedule got changed, and I got put in the worst section of the house, and I wasn't going to make any money at all, and I was really upset about it. But I just said, just don't complain, just focus on doing a good job. And one of my customers said I was giving really good service, and he asked me what I did in my spare time, and I told him I was pursuing an engineering degree. And so he gave me his business card, and 6 months later I ended up getting a job for Georgia Tech. And so basically I knew that God was opening doors for me to possibly go back to school, which I've been trying to do for a long time. And so I still haven't gone back to school yet, but I've been working there for over a year, and I finally, through working there, I got an awesome letter of recommendation. So even though my GPA is not the best due to some withdrawals that I had to do, it looks like God is working up towards me getting to go to Tech, which would be amazing, but it definitely is something impossible for me to do on my own. So I'm really excited to see that. And some other things we were talking about is, like Sally had mentioned, when she was making the decision to move, that was an example of challenged faith. Connie, she's believing in God and his assistance in helping her with her mom. And then also she has a friend named Barbara who had a heart attack, and that was an example of crisis faith and believing that God would make her through that, or take her through that heart attack, and that she'd come out on the other side. And she did. So those are our little examples.
Good. That's good. Did you come up with any examples?
For which one?
Any of them? Yeah.
Pick one. Okay. Impossible?
I can't, I have my glasses on.
Okay. Well, there you go. There's a fleece. This thing is really hot. So Angel had, her brother was involved in a tragedy. It wasn't her brother, but it was a friend of her brother. And that individual eventually lost his life, but her brother's friend had a brother who was extremely angry due to the circumstances of the accident and losing his brother, and promised effectively a revenge killing. And what was it, the next day, almost? How long did it take for that individual to turn around?
I was claiming the Lord, because it's not my brother's fault. The angel of God. So just my brother and his friend, they were traveling on the highway, As they were traveling, that his friend was driving the bike, so he went and hit the container lorry. So the friend went under the container lorry, but for my brother named Moses, what happened? The angel of God pulled his at the back and threw him into the bush during that time, and he was felt giddy and he was lying down. But the friend who was there, he was started crying and yelling, and since it's a midnight, no one will be passing, only the container lorry or trailer will be passing that time. So my brother got up from that place, and he told, I will come and help you, don't get worried. So when he was pulling him away, because the container lorry was there, and because the driver just left that and ran away from that place, and he was pulling his friend. As he was pulling, he saw that both the legs has gone. And during that time, his elder brother was coming on the way, and he saw that his brother was has met an accident. So they called for an emergency, and then as they were traveling in the emergency car, so what happened? My brother's friend Eve told everything what happened in the accident, and he told it's my fault that when I was driving, we met an accident. It's not my brother's fault. But still the elder brother, then he died on the spot. But the elder brother, he was very angry with my brother because my brother is still alive. So he told, I will kill you and your family also. And during that time, my father and myself, whole family, we went to my aunt's house for 1 week. My father told, you all stay there, don't get worried, everything will be all right. So at that time, I told my father, nothing will happen, the Lord will take care of us, and everything will be all right. So within few months, the case was nothing, and they found it's only that friend's fault, and because he has given the testimony, so everything went on very well. And that elder brother also, God changed his mind, and everything went on very well. So that is the thing God did in our life.
You know, sometimes these experiences are dramatic and amazing, and sometimes they're just very small. But it's a matter of who's in charge and who I believe is helping me through this. Take what's right about name it and claim it. What did y'all come up with? And what's wrong with it? You didn't get that far, okay? Who got that far? Did anyone? You got that far? Go for it.
What's right with it is
it green?
It's green. Oh. What's right with name it and claim it is that you're supposed to have undoubtable faith. You're supposed to believe in what you're supposed to have faith in what you believe and what you want. But the error is that you don't think about God's desires. You only think about your own desires. And if it's not God's desires, it doesn't matter how much you believe and name it and claim it. He's not going to give it to you if it's not His desire.
Okay.
Primarily have the same message.
Yeah, we were talking about a scripture in John. Here, I'll let her
In John, Jesus tells his disciples, if you ask anything in my name, I'll do it or give it to you. So that sounds kind of name it and claim it to me. So what's wrong with that is something I've been wrestling with for a long time. But it's, I think, fairly clear that it's to be in my name means consistent with me, with who I am, what I want, what I'm doing, who you are in me. But my suspicion is that actually I fall short of taking full advantage of what that's actually offering. That, there are a lot of things that we sort of don't pray for because we don't believe God will do it, or even if we pray for it, we don't believe God will do it. This is part of the, okay, keep teaching me, you know.
I think one of the big issues, too, is that a lot of times we think God, we may have faith and we'll believe it, but we think he's going to drop it in our lap. Sometimes there's something he wants us to do.
That scripture that says, if you ask anything in my name, I will give it to you. But the second half of that verse says, according to my will. And in my name, according to my will. So both things have to be going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
That's the error in the name and claim it. And they've forgotten, hey, this ain't about you. This is about you wanting what I want. Are you looking out for the interests of Jesus Christ, or are you looking out for your own interests?
Yeah. We're out of time. I want to tell you what we're going to do next week. We're going to talk about building faith so you can have a more faithful life. Okay? So we can live as people of faith and use our faith and believe in our faith and strengthen our belief. We're going to talk about problems. Problems become a crisis of belief. We have to decide, is God real or not? Is all this we're saying about God real? And if it is, then I don't have a problem. You see? So we'll be talking about that. Now, I do have homework for you. Oh. Nothing like homework, right? This will take you 10 minutes. That's all, okay? Do it before you come back next week, and it'll help us give a foundation for what we're going to learn. You can do it together, or you can do it separately. Everybody have one. One more here, okay. And I have extras if anybody loses things. No fair coming in and saying I lost it, or the dog ate my homework, or I didn't have a printer and I couldn't print it out. I've heard all of them. So let's pray together. Who feels led to make a prayer of blessing tonight for all of us, that we'll have a wonderful, faith-filled, amazing week, that God will do something special? You'll pray? Go for it.